The reason for this hearing is to simply provide a forum for airing the issue itself, for ventilating the issue, for bringing it out in the public domain.
In the United States, our First Amendment principles put a premium on free expression. Art often disregards or challenges cultural norms, frequently causing conflict with those content with the status quo. Negotiating the boundaries of artistic expression is a continuous cultural back and forth. A prime example of an art versus society conflict occurred in the 1980s. Popular music of the time broke new boundaries, specifically in terms of sexually explicit and profane lyrics. An influential group of parents, shocked at what their young teens were being exposed to, brought the issue all the way to the floor of the U.S. Senate. The legislative hearings that ensued resulted in the record industry's governing body, the Recording Industry Association of America, creating a policy for labeling inappropriate music. Through political pressure and financial incentives, the parents and the record industry were able to reach a compromise to control children's exposure to explicit material, one that allowed parents to protect their children without infringing on artists' fundamental rights. Musicians experiment with lyrics, composition, and performance to express new and sometimes controversial ideas. Rock, the genre of the young and rebellious, has a particular affinity for controversy.
In rock music, there had always been this undercurrent of gaudiness, and I mean, rock and roll, the term itself is a euphemism for sex.
When Elvis first started swinging his hips in the 1950s, it caused an uproar. Early rock songs were certainly racy, especially for the time. As society grew to accept the raunchiness of early rock, new music became even edgier to maintain the rebelliousness that attracted teen audiences. As hard rock and heavy metal emerged in the 1970s, they pushed boundaries further, with references to graphic sex and often violent lyrics and subjects. The recording industry did not respond to this changing content. It made no effort to interfere with artistic expression.
You couldn't control free speech. It was not necessarily the label's ideas, but it was the artist's ideas.
By 1985, popular music had reached new levels of vulgarity. Artists across mainstream music were pushing cultural norms of public expression, regularly using profanity and explicit sexual references, and sometimes invoking graphic violence.
By the mid-'80s, people felt a lot more free to push the envelope. So, yeah, I mean, there were songs that were a lot more graphic and explicit.
Some parents were truly shocked at the music their children were being exposed to.
She was a sex fiend. I met her in a hotel lobby, masturbating with a magazine. She said,
Those parents included several powerful women, specifically Washington wives, wives of influential men in politics. These women, with impressive influence in their own right, were Susan Baker, wife of Treasury Secretary James Baker, Tipper Gore, wife of Senator Al Gore, Pam Hauer, wife of a major D.C. developer and political donor, and Sally Nevius, wife of Washington City Council Chairman John Nevius. In 1985, these women formed the Parents Music Resource Center, or PMRC. Their goal was to label obscene music, make the public aware of the dangers of explicit music, and help parents protect their children from exposure. The PMRC created a 17-person board of advisors and a national advisory board, made up of other Washington wives, as well as experts in relevant disciplines, such as mass media and child development. The PMRC also created the Filthy 15, a list of songs they found particularly objectionable. It included major hits, like Prince's Darling Nikki, as well as lesser-known musicians and tracks, all released after 1980. The PMRC made an offer to the RIAA, asking them to institute a policy for labeling explicit music. The requested label would indicate the type of content, violence, occult, or sex. They also wanted stores to have explicit lyrics available for full review prior to purchase, and a complete ban on explicit album art. The RIAA refused this proposal.
I think we always like to cooperate, but we didn't like to get pushed around or told what we could do.
After these unsuccessful efforts to negotiate, the PMRC used its influence. 4 of its members were married to members of the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, to get this Senate committee to hold a hearing investigating this so-called porn rock and determining what should be done to control it. Tipper Gore, Susan Baker, and Pastor Jeff Ling testified about the urgent need for music labeling.
We think it's imperative to discuss this question. What can be done to help parents who want to protect their children from these messages if they want to?
Testifying against censorship were Twisted Sister frontman Dee Snider, avant-garde guitarist Frank Zappa, and folk singer-songwriter John Denver. Meanwhile, a bill had been proposed in the Senate to create a tax on blank cassette tapes, paid directly to record companies. The RIAA was its main supporter, as the tax could provide them $250 million of revenue yearly. It seems an unlikely coincidence that less than a month after the porn rock hearings, the home taping bill was brought to the Subcommittee on Patents, Copyrights, and Trademarks. 4 members of the Commerce Committee were also on this subcommittee. Notably, these senators were the same ones with wives involved with the PMRC. As a result of the hearings, the Commerce Committee decided that the RIAA needed to institute a policy for labeling explicit music, or the government would be forced to step in and regulate content. The Audio Home Recording Act was not actually signed into law until a later iteration in 1992, but its introduction in 1985 was a legislative start. A savvy organization like the RIAA certainly would have been aware that the legislative process can take a long time. There is no explicit documentation, but it seems highly likely that the RIAA made an agreement with the PMRC.
There's absolutely no coincidence that those 4 legislators' wives were on the PMRC.
This was a compromise. The RIAA would give the PMRC some of what it wanted, a form of record labeling, and the RIAA would avoid congressional regulation and get efforts to pass its home recording tax. To fulfill their part of the compromise, the RIAA now had to create and institute a policy for labeling explicit music, or risk having Congress pass a law regulating their industry. But the organization had to be careful to not upset artists. The RIAA decided to revisit the PMRC's initial proposal regarding record labeling as a starting point to crafting a labeling policy. The RIAA's ultimate offer drew from the PMRC's suggestions, but had some major differences. Instead of a rating to indicate the type of content, the RIAA crafted a sticker to identify the album as potentially offensive. The RIAA also continued to allow explicit album covers, and did not require stores to have lyrics. The RIAA decided that sticker placement would be voluntary, but stressed that it would be strongly encouraged, such that all major labels would comply.
I think most labels had a committee that would listen to all the records and come up with their recommendations.
While the PMRC did not get everything it asked for, such as labeling for specific ages and types of obscene content, it agreed to the RIAA's terms because they addressed the PMRC's most important need, a way for parents to gauge whether music is appropriate for their child. The sticker provides an alert to parents to pay attention to the content of the album. Parents can decide for themselves whether the music is appropriate for their child. The PMRC-RIAA compromise of labeling and censorship continues to the present day because of its flexibility. Instead of stating exactly what is and is not appropriate, the policy allows artists and record labels to decide if an album or song is deserving of the parental advisory sticker. As art has inevitably renegotiated our cultural norms over time, these adjustable controls have enabled a durable compromise between free expression and protection from obscenity. Politics, ugly as it can actually be key to facilitating compromise solutions for difficult conflicts. Congressional consideration of the home audio tax bill provided the RIAA real leverage in negotiations. This lesson may be applicable to current controversies, such as net neutrality and sustainable energy. If leaders use their power to facilitate political trade-offs, they may enable compromise when people in conflict are not able to reach an agreement on social priorities.